Welcome to this episode. It is said that the search is more rewarding than the find. I don't know if you heard that before. Okay, how about this one? The journey is more thrilling than the destination. In Nigeria, we have a tendency to assume that there is no reason to the things that we do. We see a road, for example, we see a building or an office, and then we ask, what idiot thought about this idea? Or we say, do we even need this? And then we end up with it's probably just a scheme to siphon money and take from the national coffers. The last thing we do, as a matter of fact, is ask, why do we actually have this? What were they thinking when they did this? And can we go into their minds and then see what it is they were trying to accomplish? And then if we have better ideas, we could change it. The reason this is important is because sometimes I think as Nigerians, especially as young people in Nigeria, we forget that the people who are in charge or the people who have been in charge have brains too. They research things, they understand things, and a lot of the things that they have decided to do come from resolutions that many different people have come together to bring forth. So, in the spirit of that, I will ask this question: why do we have the NYSC today? The National Youth Service Corps. What is it for? The National Youth Service Corps is a mandatory post-tertiary scheme which was set up by the Nigerian government during the military regime of General Yakubu Gowon. The reason that they set it up, they said, was that they were trying to reconstruct and reconcile and rebuild the country after the Nigerian Civil War. That's a good reason. But that is a cheerleading statement. That is something to get our spirits happy. That does not really tell us what it is they set it up for. So we have to dig deeper. Many countries have mandatory military service. When you think of countries like Israel, a lot of countries in Eastern Europe, Russia, for example, they have a year where they take their citizens and put them through some military training in the event that they will one day be conscripted into the military. Nigeria doesn't have that. And so, in order to have something akin to that, we have the NYSC. That's another reason, right? There are more, but we'll come to those eventually. What we do know is this: when you are done with your studies in a university or in a polytechnic in Nigeria, you go for your national service year, which is a 1 year period where you are a copper. For those of us who are coppers or who have been coppers, copper we. The reason we have the NYSC is obviously multifaceted. There are 1,000 reasons. But right off the bat, it was created on the 22nd of May 1973. And it was created specifically because after the Civil War, there was a very large cloud of discontent and disunity in Nigeria. And the Nigerian authorities thought we need to solve this particular problem. We cannot have Nigerians feeling as though they are not part of Nigeria because of where they are from. We need to find a way to get Nigerians all the way here to go all the way there, and vice versa. It was also established by decree, but it was established with some wishful thinking because the decree stated that it was trying to encourage the development of ties among the youth. That's very colorful language, but we understand what that means. Basically, the NYSC operates in three phases. First, there's the orientation camp. This is where they post you to a state and then you go for 3 weeks and you engage in some rigorous military led exercises where you wake up military time, you go to bed military time, and you face some very serious, and to be honest, it's not a must. They allow you if you are not able to, but if you really want to take part in it, you go to obstacle courses, you go on runs, and then you engage in competitions during those 3 weeks. Then there's the posting. The posting is when you're done with the camp, you are sent to the city where your camp is, or to the state where your camp is, to work for the rest of that year. You'll be paid for that work by the government, and obviously by the person who employs you, a stipend. And during that posting, you get to live, work, and integrate with other Nigerians who are obviously not the same people that you know. So the person who is from Kwara State will be posted to Delta, and the person who is from Delta will be posted to Taraba, and the person from Taraba will be posted to Kebbi, and the person from Kebbi will be posted to Adamawa. That's the spirit. Then there's the allowance, or as the NYC people call it, the alawi. This is where the federal government pays you a certain amount of money, despite what your employer will pay you during your service here. Then there's the monthly allowance, or as our corpers will call it, the alawi. This refers to the amount of money that the federal government will pay you for every month that you work, and it's different from what your employer will pay you where you are posted to. That's basically how the NYSC works. Now, back to the objectives of the program. If you were to go to the NYSC website or you research on the NYSC, there are 1,000 reasons why the NYSC is important. But we pick three. And we pick three of these reasons because we feel that the other reasons are somehow included in these reasons. The first is to inculcate discipline in Nigerian youth by instilling in them a tradition of industry at work and of patriotic and loyal service to Nigeria in any situation they may find themselves. This particular one is something I had to underline because I have said on this podcast severally that the Nigerian military, for example, is not good with interacting with Nigerian civilians. This is one exception to that rule. When you are an NYSC corper, your engagement with the Nigerian military is very different from when you are just a regular civilian. As a matter of fact, when you ask a lot of people, the NYSC corper is treated as though they are in active military service. In many places, they call corpers government picking or government children. It is a way of saying that while you are serving, you are seen there as a representative of the government. And so you are given some sort of special status. And people can attest to this. In many places, a copper would get into a bus and they would tell him or her not to pay. They would need a service and they would tell people to perform that service for them because they feel as though they're supposed to make you feel welcome and they're supposed to make you feel at home. And because of the kind of interactions that you have, you learn things that you would not have learned elsewhere. You learn discipline, you learn fatigue. You wake up in the morning before the sun rises, you go for runs, you engage in competitions. You basically go through a crash course of what it is like to be a serviceman. That is one very big advantage of the NYSC. Another is to develop a sense of corporate existence and common destiny of the people of Nigeria. This is at the soul of the program. After the Civil War in Nigeria, and I should just mention quickly that this is still something that exists today. So you can imagine how it was 40 years ago. After the Civil War in Nigeria, a lot of Nigerians were not happy to be Nigerians. Of course, a lot of these Nigerians were from the eastern part of the country where they had been victims of the war. And the government realized that they could not simply speak their way to reconciliation. There had to be programs that would be done to force interaction between Nigerians that would turn out for the better. That is what the NYSC was created for. It was created so that the young person who was just coming from the war ravaged Mwahia would find himself in Abuja or in Makurdi or in Lagos and be accepted as a Nigerian on Nigerian soil, irrespective of where you're coming from. It was created so that the young person from Kaduna would find themselves in Ebonyi and they would be welcomed as fellow Nigerians because we are now all Nigerians. It is, to some people watching this program, they may think it's wishful thinking, but to a very large extent, it has worked. To a very large extent, it has worked. There is a very healthy sense of camaraderie that comes with the NYSC program. And I'm sure that our listeners will do us justice in the comments and tell us some of the great stories that they have during their service year. The third part, and this is the part that I like, is that the Nigerian youth are exposed to the models of living of the people in different parts of Nigeria. This, to me, is priceless. In one of our videos on this platform, we ask the person beside you, how much do you know about Taraba? Ask the person beside you, why is Delta not Bayelsa? There used to be states like Gongola before. There used to be states like Bendel before. Those states no longer exist today. Why? What became of them? The average Nigerian, believe it or not, is born in a place, and for the most of their lives, they stay in that place and do not go out of that geopolitical zone. So, for example, a young man who is born in Sokoto may live his entire life not going outside the boundaries of Niger State. He goes from Sokoto down to Kebbi to Niger and back. And he will have no idea, except what he sees on TV, of what life is like in Abuja. He would have no idea, except what he hears on the radio or sees on the internet, about the realities of living in Lagos. There are Nigerians today who are as alien to other parts of Nigeria as people from other countries. The young man from Cameroon knows as much as the young lady from Gombe knows about Bayelsa State. They are both too far away and they will probably never have a reason to find themselves there. But think about how much we're missing out on. Think about the richness of Nigeria. Think about the fact that many people will never get to see places like Calabar, and many people will never get to see states like Bauchi, and many people will never get to go to places like Yobe and Kwara and Ondo and Kogi. The reason for this is because, to a very large extent, Nigeria is a multiplicity of nations. We're a collection of different nationalities. Therefore, we are kind of self-sufficient in ourselves. However, the country moves forward when we move around it. That is how we stimulate it. And the NYSC was created for just that purpose. Almost by force. Almost by force. It is the same way that our parents would look at us when we were becoming too introverted and say, "Why are you not playing with your friends outside? Go outside and play." That is almost what the NYSC does to certain Nigerians. And for the most part, it's a good thing. But then there's the bad side. In fact, one of the only times that people bring up the NYSC in public discussions today is when they want to bring up the criticisms of the NYSC and the reasons that the NYSC has outlived its relevance. In short, a lot of people believe that the NYSC should be scrapped. Before I give my opinion on this, I should give you their reasons. First reason: corruption. Now, this is not the problem with the NYSC, but it is true to say that there are certain things in Nigeria that enables corruption. The NYSC, as it is constituted, does not help for things like transparency. The remuneration, for example, the camp where you have to buy uniforms and you have to buy khaki trousers and boots and socks, has been seen to be a very big avenue for diverting public funds. The feeding, the logistics that are involved, the competitions that are to be had, the welfare, there are so many holes where great amounts of money just disappear. And people believe that when the NYC was created, Nigeria was small enough and the people were of the number where it was sustainable. But right now, where on average there are about 1 million people a year applying to go to NYSC, if you divide that by 36 states, you would find that that kind of stream. But now, what you find that there are 1 million people a year applying to go for service, you would realize that that kind of stream was not thought up by the originators of this scheme, and therefore it is becoming a problem administratively. Then there's the insecurity problem. This is perhaps the biggest argument against the NYSC. Some people don't just believe in this. Why would a person who was born, schooled, and brought up in Lagos agree, after living for 21 years in the southwest, that he will be transferred to serve in Taraba State? He has never been there, he doesn't know anything about the place. And as far as he's concerned, all the news he hears is that the moment he drives past Ondo State, he's technically in foreign land. And therefore, he's at the mercy of bandits and kidnappers and all sorts of terrible people who do not want to see him get back home safely. Why would a person who is from the southeast agree to be posted to Sokoto, where he has heard for the most part that his lifestyle is not welcome there because there are so many religious gaps and cultural gaps that he has never been given orientation about. And this can be said from different place to different place to different place, different place. Basically, when you cannot guarantee the safety of people, you should not put them in a situation where their safety may be compromised. This is a very honest criticism of the scheme. Although, like the former, it is not so much a criticism of the scheme as it is that the Nigerian government has not created an enabling environment for the scheme to thrive. Then there's the force of participation. This is probably the second most powerful argument against the NYSC. There's a reason the NYSC has been able to stay so relevant. One of the reasons is that if you do not undertake the NYSC, you'll be excluded from certain Nigerian opportunities. For example, you cannot work for the government if you cannot show your NYSC certificate or your NYSC exemption certificate. So, in a way, the government basically forces you to serve, and they do not give you much of a choice as to where you are going to serve. This means that there are many people who, because of the first two problems that we've mentioned, do not serve, and therefore Nigeria loses the chance to use their brain capacity to help this country. Then there's welfare and due diligence. This is basically a combination of all three. Nowadays, because of the number of people who apply and because of the when NYSC started, it was you'd go to camp and this is the NYSC set for this year. Then they became two batches. There was the first batch and then the second batch. Then there were three batches. There was batch A, there was batch B, and there was batch C. And then it became so much. Now there are three batches with two streams each. So there's batch A stream 1 and batch A stream 2. There's batch B stream 1, there's batch B stream 2, and then there's batch C stream 1 and batch C stream 2. And it is not slowing down. When people watch this podcast in 5 years and 10 years' time, they may be laughing at this particular segment because they may have been a batch D and maybe a batch E, who knows? But obviously, the point is, it is beginning to stretch this country, and therefore, there should be something that we should do about it. Now, at this point, I should say that all these criticisms are valid. I don't agree that it should scrap NYSC, but all these criticisms are valid. I will also say that all these criticisms are valid for practically anything else in Nigeria. Government has a problem of corruption and remuneration. Government has a problem of insecurity. Government has the problem of force of participation. Almost everything in Nigeria suffers from these problems. Therefore, should Nigeria solve these problems, they will no longer be the problems of the NYSC or the NYSC copper. They will be Nigerian problems that we can solve. And when we solve them, we can move ahead. Like I said, I do not think we should scrap the NYSC. A good friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, told me a story. He told me about his service here. And when he told me about his service here, It was because we were talking about the NYSC particularly. When we brought up the story of the insecurity and the force of participation, I mentioned to him a story of a young lady who met her husband through the NYSC. She was to serve somewhere in eastern Nigeria, and so she took a car from Lagos to the east. She expected to get there sometime in the evening so she could go to the camp and she could get herself steady for the next day. However, like many Nigerians, we do not really comprehend differences between city life and rural life. She assumed that she would just get to the state and she would ask, please, where's the camp? And they'd be like, oh, it's just down the road there. And then she could take a car or take a bike. It turns out that by the time she got there, it was something around 8 p.m. in the night. And it was a 3.5 hour drive, I think, to the camp. There was no way that she was going to wait in the bus for probably an hour and then move in a place she had never been to in her life around that time. But there was a young man who she was talking to while she was in the car, and the young man was going back home. He lived there. And so she was telling him she's here for the youth service and that's where she's going to. This young man was the one who told her that is how you get to the camp. But also, he told her and said, listen, where you're going to is quite far away. I don't think you'll make it today. Come and stay in my family house. And then first thing tomorrow morning, you can be on your way. That's how she met her husband. They've been married for 15 years. When I told my friend this story, he told me a story of his, which was different, but just as interesting. He said while he was serving, they went for a Thanksgiving service after the 3 weeks were over and they were supposed to go to their principal places of assignment. And he said people were literally giving testimonies that they came to the NYC camp. He said there was a lady who came, picked up the microphone, and said that in her family, she's the first person to serve, and that nobody believed that she would be able to serve, but she's here to thank God that she has been able to complete the NYC service. And he said that until he had that experience, he had never seen the NYSC as anything that you celebrate. He just saw it as a formality. The same way that you go to school and you finish GSS3 and then you go to SS1, and then you finish that and you write WAEC. How many people celebrate WAEC? You know, maybe you celebrate graduating from the university, but that's understandable. You graduated from the university. That is how some people see the NYSC. He did not know that. He had never seen that. And that opened his eyes for him to understand that there are different people with different aspirations in this country. And that is the lesson of the NYSC. That is it. There are people in this country whose dream is to become a representative of their locality. There are people in this country who really just want to see this country. There are people in this country who would never have the chance to cross certain divides or cross certain lines. The NYSC solves all these problems. There is a saying, it is a wise saying. It says, you do not throw away the baby with the bathwater. It's a simple enough saying. What it means is that when there is a good thing, from time to time there will be problems with this good thing. And that when you have these problems, you don't discard the good thing because of the problems. You take away the problems and you keep the good thing. It is my contention that the NYSC is priceless. It is my contention that the exposure from the NYSC is priceless. it is my contention that the education from the NYSC is priceless. The distribution of talent is something that Nigeria needs to look into very seriously. And not only look into it as far as the NYSC goes, we need to be able to replicate it. For many young people, and by young people, I mean in their 20s, the NYSC gave them the chance to go to rural areas of Nigeria and teach. This is one of the most common assignments that you are given during NYSC. They move you to a village somewhere and then you become a teacher. And we have people with degrees in engineering and physics teaching mathematics, teaching chemistry, teaching biology, teaching English, literature to children who have not had any exposure whatsoever. They are bringing their wealth of experience from their travel, from the quality of the education that they have had, and they are bringing it across generational lines and imparting it into people that will surely have their lives changed by it. If you look at it in a small pocket, you will understand that the NYSC is the reason that a young boy in a far-flung locality in Kano State will be taught by a graduate of engineering from the University of Ibadan. That is not something that we should throw away. That is something we should look to replicate and look to improve on for the betterment of this country. In my opinion, and that's what this is, but it is not a humble opinion, I must say. We keep the NYSC. We change the bathwater, but keep this baby. Ladies and gentlemen, this was an episode of Forgetting How to Forget and Remembering How to Remember. Let us know about your NYSC experience in the comments below. God bless you and see you next time.